Today we sit down with artist, cartoonist, and indie game developer Jon Nielsen to dive into how he approaches the industry, how crucial SteamFest is for game developers and their release cycles, and his newly released game, WitchHand. Let's dive into it. Right now in the industry is an interesting time because there's so many layoffs that have been happening. I think there's like 6,000 plus layoffs just in Activision alone, in January. And as somebody who does freelance, but also has that game development experience as well, when you look at that, what is your thoughts on what's going on right now and why it's happening more so now than it has in the past?
I don't know if I can speak to the root causes other than, late stage capitalism, but it's definitely scary. And I purposely kind of skirt the edges of the game industry for my own safety, really. And I'm not that adventurous of a risk taker. So I like to have the steady paycheck. I like to know what bed I'm sleeping in. I'm consistent and safe for the most part. I do freelance, and that means my income is a little up and down from month to month. But for the most part, I'm not a big risk taker. So for that reason, for avoiding the scary stuff.
So you're not a big risk taker, but I mean, game development itself is a very big risk, right? I mean, there's so many titles getting launched, there's so much going on.
Incorrect.
Yeah. What was the draw to this style of work? I mean, you cranked out 3 games, including WitchHand, and then the 2 games in 22, and you're doing all this different freelance work with animation art and art for indie games, and there's so much going on. I mean, walk me through kind of that side of your life, how you handle all that.
I definitely like to keep busy.
Yeah, I see that.
Basically, these sort of driving motivations, I work hard every day so that one day I don't have to work at all. One day I can take it easy. Over the years, I've done just a lot of different stuff. I've tried, videos and comics and art and just everything. And video games ended up being the one that was inevitable. I grew up playing video games. I always wanted to make video games. Yeah, it was inevitable, and eventually I finally landed on it. And at a good point in my career, because when you're an indie solo developer, largely solo, you have to wear a lot of hats.
Yes,
and
you do.
Luckily, I've had a lot of training over the years that I'm sort of able to just accidentally be moderately good at all the different little things that I need to be good at to do all this.
But what drove you to your first title, right? I mean, 2 games in 1 year is huge, and I don't know what the dev time was on that. I have to imagine your dev time or your dev cycle was pretty short. So kind of walk me through that.
The dev cycles and the scope are very purposely designed to be manageable for just me. And I don't want to make it sound like it's always only been me. I have had helpers. So everything I do is very purposefully scoped to be achievable.
Yeah.
And with each game, they get a little more complex, gameplay wise.
What engine do you work on?
Game Maker.
Okay, I got you. No desire to change into anything else? You're all in on Game Maker?
Not at this point, no.
That's fair. That's fair.
I figure if I ever go 3D, which will probably never happen because it's just a workload.
What do you think is a big misconception that players have when they look at games, whether it's indie, whether it's AAA, that is just way off mark, in your opinion?
I think most people generally understand how hard it is, how much goes into making a game, but just the sheer maddening scope of it all, how many moving parts there are. Big AAA games have teams of hundreds. It's insane. There's so many moving parts. Yeah, I brought up 3D for a quick second earlier, but there's so many parts of, making a model and rigging it and texturing it and animating it. And even then, animating a 3D model, you open up that submenu and there's face, hands, locomotion. All of those are all separate jobs for the bigger companies. Each little those are separate people. It's insane, and it's no wonder that they take so long to make and so many launch with problems because there's just so many moving parts. Yeah, it's definitely very important, especially in video games, but really everywhere, that you manage your expectations and you go in not expecting to be a runaway hit success. Because that doesn't happen. Of course, there's a few exceptions where it does happen, but for you listening, I'm sorry, it's not going to happen for you on your first go around.
Yeah.
So that's super important to understand what's going to happen when you release your games.
But we had briefly talked about kind of the projects you take on versus the ones potentially that you don't. And how do you kind of approach that, right? Because there's so many games out there. There's so many developers out there. So as they come to you and they want you on their project, they see your amazing artwork and they want to bring you in, how do you approach that side of the industry? industry and then pick the ultimate projects you do want to work on?
I've accidentally become an extrovert, or at least I've become very good at pretending to be an extrovert. I'm totally not. But just the social interactions, which were terrifying at first, I've accidentally gotten good at approaching these conversations. So everything comes into my inbox through no action of my own. I spend a lot of days just answering emails nowadays, which I guess is a good problem to have. It means you're doing something right, I guess. But managing those interactions and getting a feel for the person you're talking to is critically important to whether you'll follow through with it or you want to continue working with them, just any of that stuff. I can get so much information just by how they answer my initial questions. It's like, oh, like say it's a freelance job. They're like, oh, can you draw some stuff? It's like, okay, what are you looking for exactly? And how, the response tells me everything.
What would the perfect response be, right? Somebody who knows what they're talking, somebody who knows what they want, essentially, right? Somebody who has the answers right away.
Which is a unicorn, but they do exist.
Okay.
Anytime I get to draw just a bunch of little dudes, that's my favorite. It's like, finally.
There we go.
I get to just draw. There was one, I'll go ahead and say the name. It's Oblin Party. I don't know if they've even announced yet. So sorry if I've broken your announce window. But it's just a bunch of little dudes. It's a guy with a jetpack and a guy with a rocket launcher, and they're all just fighting.
That's
like,
awesome.
Oh, this is the best. I finally specifically like cover art for games that come to me, indie games, and they're all wildly different and they want different things and they're in different genres and styles. I end up really stretching my art muscles for a lot of these because they're outside my wheelhouse. So I have to suddenly become an expert at drawing crocodiles. So I have tons of reference of crocodiles. It's like, all right, this is what I'm doing today. The Steam NextFest, which has only existed for a few years. They didn't even call it the NextFest at first. What was it, like 2019, 2020? You basically have to base your entire dev cycle around the NextFest now. It's so important.
Because you could use 2 NextFests each year, one in early and one in late, and you could only participate in one, correct?
They changed the rules. You can only be in one ever per game.
Really? So if you try to jump the gate and you're really excited about it and you put your game on there like a year before it launches, then you're screwed essentially at that point.
That's actually, not a good call. You got it exactly right. And which I did with my first 2 games. Oops. But I think it is important to have something presentable very early on so you can get the Steam page up, have all your branding at least close to what you want it to be. All that stuff figured out early so you can have your page up and start showing it to people.
What would be like your best practices per se for building out a trailer, for sucking people in to get excited about the game?
I've only done a few. I've done the trailers for my own game, so I've done 3. By no means an expert, but my biggest advice that I learned from my most recent one is get a song that has a really cool sectioned rhythm to it. The song that I use for the WitchHand release date announcement trailer has a click in it, or like a clap, and I can cut all the scenes to the click.
I like that.
Feels real good when you play. But real advice that actually is good, genuine real advice, cutting it to a rhythm, having a flow to the trailer. Super important just to keep people engaged. They got to see what your game is about. You have to show actual gameplay loops. Don't just have cinematics. But then that said, on Steam, most people watch Steam trailers muted. They're not even going to hear all the hard work you've done on the sound and the music.
That is very true.
It's hard depending on your game, but you got to find a way to do it where you're showing different scenes and different things to look at. If your game is dragging cards around on a screen, you got to make it exciting. You got to figure it out.
That was going to be my next question.
That's my game. But that's also goes back to the design where you have to design your game with that in mind. Always keep it in the back of your mind. Like, I need to be able to show this to people. How can I design the game to be as exciting to look at as I can? So there's lots of times where I'm making the trailer or screenshots or just GIFs to post on Twitter for the day or whatever. And it's like, there's something missing. This isn't exciting enough. I need to put more sparkles and the effects, whatever it is, and then I do just to make the GIF look better.
What's a solid question to ask a player when you're trying to play test a game?
You start out broad and then get more specific, but basically like, what were you doing? What were you trying to do? What were the vibes you got? I like to ask, how they would pitch my game.
Oh, okay.
Which I feel like is a mind hack.
Yeah, I like that.
I am terrible at that.
Yeah.
You think I'd be good at it, but I'm really terrible at giving the elevator pitch for my games.
I was gonna say just pick it and choose it from everybody else. You know, it's like I like that. I'll take that.
Like, what do you think? What is this? So many people tell me it's a chill, wholesome city builder, card-based city builder, which is not what I was going for, but I'll accept it and I'll use it. So thank you. The other question that comes to mind that I like to ask in feedback is, what do you wish you could have done? Like, what did you want to do but couldn't?
I like
and
that.
You get so many ideas generated from that.
I have never talked to a developer the night before their game releases. Ever. So
it's close.
It's very close, right? So for you, like, how does that feel right now?
I'm sure you can imagine it's the calm before the storm. Yeah, definitely anxious about it. And speaking of managing your expectations, I'm trying. Oh man, I'm trying. But I care about it so much, and I put everything I have into it, and I want it to fly on its own and succeed. But I have to also keep half of my heart, and like, it's probably gonna tank. Sales aren't going to be there. I'm going to have to say goodbye to it.
Potentially.
And those two have to coincide, and you can't let yourself go too much in one direction or the other. So it's all just waiting, the waiting.
I have to ask, you've worked on so many games. Do you play the games that you work on? Obviously outside of your own.
Not always. I don't always get the opportunity to. I love the chance. If sometimes I'll get like an early build to try out to get a vibe for it, so I can really capture the energy and the art. But a lot of times, no, I don't. Part of it is time. Part of it is time. I can't say everything.
And that makes a lot of sense. Have you ever like picked up a game and you started playing it, and then all of a sudden you realize, oh wait, I worked on this game. That's my artwork.
I don't think I've ever gotten that far into it. And was surprised. But I'm definitely like, speaking of the NextFest, I'll scroll through it and it's like, that's me. Whoa, whoa, there I am again.
That's awesome.
I don't know how this keeps happening. Or even on the Switch on my TV, I'm going through the Switch store. It's like, how do I get there?
It's like, I did that.
It always feels super weird.
If you had to give an elevator pitch for WitchHand and talk about what's exciting about it, the gameplay, the characters, all that good stuff, what would that elevator pitch sound like?
I'll start with what it started as, is I set out to make a card-based civilization. So I stripped down my version of civilization using cards. I wanted to have, that sort of macro level. You're managing villages and you're interacting with rival nations and you have your units, but just an ambiguous board space where you can put everything wherever you wanted. And a lot of that has remained, but it's sort of veered more into the direction of a city builder and even a bit of an automation game. Just by necessity, I had to keep putting more and more of the game sort of managing itself. So setting that stuff up. A little bit of roguelike mixed in, where you're playing unique characters. So every playthrough is different just because of the cards you get and the unique play styles and abilities of the witch characters that you're playing.
It's kind of a big game, right? It's got a lot going on with it. So if you had to break that down into a nutshell, how would you do that? Like, how would you describe that?
There is definitely a lot going into it. And it's not a secret at all. I won't deny it. It's inspired heavily by Stacklands. I love Stacklands. So if you know Stacklands,
there's some similarities.
Out.
Okay.
Mine's got, some different stuff going on that I think you might like.
I see. Okay.
Which is, by design, I knew I wanted to make something within the Stacklands framework, but put my own spin on it, do it how I would do it, and make it appealing to people who had already played it and who had not played it.